Welcome, everyone. We'll welcome Connie in particular in a minute, but first I just want to thank you all for being here, for spending part of your weekend. It means so much to me. I also want to let you know I do read all the texts at the end of the webinar, and I really enjoy how you interact with one another and hearing where you're from and how you're doing. So thank you for sharing that information. Some of you have been here for every one of the webinars since I started in April 2020. And I started because of the pandemic. I missed spending time with writers. So that means we're moving up to 5 years, which is really incredible when you think about it. And for others of you, this may be your first time. Welcome to you as well. You are more than welcomed. You're valued. You are, excuse me, an important part of this writing community. Let me share my screen. I am going to go over some information and then we'll jump in with Connie. I have always, each month, I've shown you a photo of a garden or something in a garden. And this time I have this photo, which is, I think, especially beautiful. I don't know what those plants are, but I like the variety. I like the wildness. I like the bird bath in the middle. I feel almost like it is a painting, beautiful composition. You know, I have a pre-con coming the Thursday before Malice Domestic. It's associated with Malice, Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot. I'm very excited about it. Here's how I'm structuring it. A lecturette, I'm going to talk about some aspect of the writing process. And then I'm going to have an exercise where you'll actually be able to hands-on apply the lesson. And then we'll debrief. We'll talk about what worked, what maybe didn't work as well for you. And it is so more than just hands-on, it's highly interactive. It is based on my book, the Agatha Award-winning book by the same title, which, by the way, is, I'm just always awed when I say this. It was endorsed by Louise Penny, who said it was a goldmine of information, and Dan Brown, David Baldacci. So I do hope that you'll consider joining. I think it's going to be a great day from 10 to 5, immersive. And oh yeah, early bird pricing in effect for the rest of this month, and then it goes up periodically. 20% off if you're a member of any group or attending Malice, relevant groups. And I also did want to mention that I am supporting Malice Domestic Angels, a charity associated with the conference. So next month, we're going to talk plotting, writing with a through-line plot. Then in March, we have another special guest, Jessica Berg, really interesting agent. And she has important thoughts about the creative process. So I think you'll be interested in that. And then what Connie and I do, what we know well, fact-based storytelling, how to use facts to write fiction. And some other things I want to mention, I am doing 2 new groups of the Mystery Masterminds. They did both sell out. Probably do some in the late spring, kind of, I don't know, we'll see, starting in the end of April, maybe. And every Wednesday, John releases an FAQ, right? An FAQ, a frequently asked question about the craft of writing, 1 to 3 minute, I call them shorties. They're on YouTube. And presentations that are with my guests are also available on YouTube. So go poke around. I do hope you'll subscribe. That opens up features that lets us make the videos even better for you. So if you like those FAQs, please do subscribe. And we're in our next cycle for the Black Orchid Novella Award. This is in partnership with the Wolf Pack. That's the literary society that celebrates all things Nero Wolfe, Rex Stout's legendary detective. I think this is our 19th year, although it may even be our 20th. I actually have to think about that. And if you win, you get $1,000, publication in Alfred Hitchcock. And if you get to New York the first weekend in December, we fetch you in style. And so the deadline's May 31st. We've already had some entries, and I do hope that you'll join in. And with that, we are now ready to jump into today's topic, which is a conversation with Connie. And I invite you to help me welcome her. Connie Berry is the author of the Kate Hamilton mysteries. They're set in the UK, written by an American author, sort of like Elizabeth
Right.
Peters, except, of course, a very different subgenre of crime fiction. That Kate is an antique dealer who happens to have a gift for solving crimes. And Connie comes by it honestly. She was raised by antique dealers, which gave her a passion for history, fine art, and travel, which makes a lot of sense when you think about the genesis of the antiques business. You have to know about the objects that you're selling. Connie's books have won multiple awards, been nominated for even more, including the Edgar Awards Lillian Jackson Braun Award, which is such an important award and such a great honor. And congratulations on that. And USA Today bestseller. She's a member of Mystery Writers of America, the UK-based Crime Writers Association, Sisters in Crime, where she is currently the president of the online chapter of Guppies. And we'll have her talk a little bit about that, because that may be something several of you might be interested in. She is coming to us from Ohio. So welcome, Connie.
Thank you, Jane. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, my pleasure. And I want to start just right away, picking up with the title of the webinar today, Your Path to Publication. How did you end up getting published?
I think, like most writers that I've talked to, I got published all of a sudden after 10 years. I had been working on my first book, which is now called A Dream of Death. I think it must have had 6 or 7 other names that I gave it, not realizing that the author doesn't often get to choose the name of a book. And I'm glad, because looking back, they were all very lame, but I've been working on that for literally 10 years. And I was teaching at the time full time, and that took up all my time. I had a weekly 50-minute lecture. I had a weekly training for leaders. And so I was really working on it mostly in the summer and on the weekends and just kind of playing around with it. And I was trying all kinds of different things. And I actually had a whole manuscript in the sense that I had typed the end. But it was just a blob. It was this big amorphous blob, and I was taking opportunities wherever I could get them to get a little feedback. Um, but I wasn't really taking the advice. And then I retired. I think it might have been 2016. And yeah, I think that was it. And once I retired, I thought, okay, well, I'm no longer Connie Berry, the teacher. Who am I? And I decided I was going to be Connie Berry, the mystery writer. And what that meant was I had to treat this more like a profession and a job. And I was going to go ahead and do this thing if it killed me, which it almost did. But I decided that I would take some of the advice that I'd been given and just see what happened. And one of the pieces of advice I had gotten from a number of people was, why don't you try putting this in the first person? I had written it in third person, which I love. And I had also written it, I had so many different points of view. It was just crazy. And I loved all my points of view. But then I had a number of people say, why don't you just put that in the first person, have Kate be the one telling the story? And so I actually remember the day when I pulled up my manuscript and I decided I was going to start from the very first sentence and put it in first person in Kate's viewpoint. And what that meant was every time I got to another viewpoint, I had to take that out and I put it in a file. And what happened was Kate came alive to me. As I put things in her voice, I started to really understand her and know her better. She had a voice finally. And I was kind of entranced by this whole process. And the interesting thing was when I looked at all my different points of view and I thought, well, there's some things in here that I'm going to have to incorporate somehow. It wasn't really that much. And so I went through this huge revision process, third person to first person, single point of view from, I don't even remember how many I had. I might have had 7 points of view. I took out whole storylines. I, I, um, I added a storyline. And when I got to the end of it, I thought, you know what? I think this may be something. And so I think I finished it around just Christmas of 2017 or something like that. Forgotten. But I was going to a conference, Sleuth Fest in Florida. And one of the things they offered was for $15, I think, you could have either an agent or an editor read your first chapter. And so I did, but I decided, okay, I've had a lot of feedback on this first book. I'd already started my second book. I'm going to send the first chapter of the second book. And I chose my editor that I have now, Faith Black Ross, who's at Crooked Lane. And she was the first appointment of the day. And I sat down with her, and the first thing she said was, I love this. I love the setting. I love your characters. And honestly, I was gobsmacked. I think I just probably sat there because I couldn't, I mean, it was like, I think I must be dreaming. And she said, but this isn't the first book in the series, is it? And I said, no, there's another book. And she said, oh, well, you didn't have it published by someone else, did you? And I said, no. And she said, oh, well, did you self-publish it? And I said, no, it's just sitting in my computer. And so she said, well, I think you better send that to me. So I went right up to my hotel room, sent her that first book, and in very short order, I was offered, I think it was a 2-book contract. So it was like everything happened all of a sudden, but after a long 10-year period.
Wow, that's quite a story. And I have several follow-up questions,
Yeah.
but I'll start at the end and work my way back. Did you just take the deal or did you then get an agent?
Well, this is another great story because I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. I knew people had agents, and I thought it would be great to have an agent, but I didn't have one. And so I emailed a friend of mine, Ellen Byron. Some of you know her. And if you do know her, pray for her because she's right on the edge of all those fires in California.
Uh,
So far, she's good. But I told her what happened. I said, I have a contract, but I don't have an agent. Do you think I need one? And she emailed right back and said, yes, you need an agent. And she told me what to do, and I did it. And what she said to do was to pick an agent that I really wanted. And I picked my agent, who's Paula Munier. And in my subject line, I put, I have a 2-book contract with Crooked Lane and need an agent.
That's a
And
great subject line. It's going to get opened.
I know. And I think I'm correct in saying that she got back to me in 20 minutes.
I'm surprised it took her so long.
Yeah.
And
So,
just for everybody's,
yeah.
excuse me for interrupting, just for everybody's information, 2 years ago, I think I did an interview in January with Paula Manier, and that is up on YouTube um, about what agents want. So I'm sure John is giving you the link right now. Did you have another comment about that?
No, I think I was done just to say that again, it was a case of something happening just all of a sudden. So within, just a week, literally, or a week and a half, I had a 2-book contract and an agent.
Okay, that's just excellent. Now let me ask my other questions because in asking them, I want to let everybody who's with us today um, really focus on some potential pitfalls that somehow you managed to avoid, but a lot of us do not. So um, the first is a two-part question. Why didn't you take the feedback that you had been getting over those years? And how did you finally decide which feedback to take?
Wow, that is a great question. Honestly, I think the reason I didn't take the advice was twofold. One, I realized it was going to take a lot of work. And number two, I had kind of fallen in love with my book. And it wasn't good. It wasn't right. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do to make it right. And at the same time, I'm getting feedback from people who should know, and I should have taken advice. But I thought, oh, I don't want to do first person. I want to do third person multi points of view. That's just what I wanted. So I kind of had to get over myself. I kind of had
Mhm.
to get over myself. And what made the difference was when finally, in a kind of desperation, I thought, okay, I'm just going to try it. I
Can't
don't
do it
have to
hard.
go with it, but I'm just going to try it. And that's when I started to hear Kate's voice.
Can you think of any advice you were given that you didn't take, that it was smart you didn't take?
Yes. One piece of advice I got a lot from people was just put this book aside. Just put it in a drawer and start with something new. This is your starter book, your learner book. It's fine, but now you've learned a lot, and that may be the very best course for some people to take. But for me, I knew I had a good story. I loved this my story. I wasn't willing to give it up, and so I persevered, Jane, and
Yeah.
I'm glad that I did.
It's such an interesting dilemma, isn't it? That we hear those two pieces of advice all the time, and they're
Yeah.
contradictory. Don't give
Yes.
up, persevere. You never know what's right around the corner.
Mhm.
TJ Newman in Falling, that was the first book, Drowning second, Worst Case Scenario third. But for her first book, she went to 40, I think it was 41 agents and got no, 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 no. And then it was the 42nd who sold the book for seven figures. It was sold to Universal Film Rights for another seven figures before publication.
Wow.
So persevere. But at the same time, if the book isn't right, it makes no sense to just keep beating your head against the wall.
Yeah.
So
Well, I kept asking the question, and the question was, tell me what I've done wrong and I'll fix it. And so I kept getting advice about this, and it's when I took that advice that I think it made all the difference. But
yeah,
um, I had put so much of myself into this book, and I had done so much research, and I was so in love with my setting and my characters. And I think if I hadn't been, I think I would have maybe put it aside and started again. But I just, 10 years of your life.
yeah,
I had
that's
put
right.
10 years into this book, and I'm just stubborn.
Here's how I'm going to distill that down. You took advice knowing that you were going to try it, and if it didn't work out, no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
What you'd been doing wasn't working, so you might as well try something else. In other words, you weren't just persevering blindly. You weren't
Right.
stubbornly saying, everyone here is stupid, my book is perfect as is.
Oh,
You
no.
decided to open your mind and let it in. So that's a different kind of perseverance. And that's what I want to have everybody open minds to, is
Yeah. And
knowing when to
the
change.
the other thing was that I hadn't gotten a bunch of rejections. And the reason was I didn't put it out there because I myself knew that it wasn't right. And I actually have printed out one of my favorite quotes. And I printed it out because I want to actually get it right. But I think it's so important. And I think this is the secret. At least it was for me. And this is by Ira Glass. and he's talking about the creative process. And he said we have the reason we get involved in the creative process and writing or painting or whatever we do is because we have good taste. We know what is good, but there is a gap. And the gap is between what we know is good and what we're able to perform. And we see that gap. And some people, that's where they quit. When they see the gap between what they know is right and what they are able to perform, they quit. But it's the people that persevere beyond that phase and put the work in,
Yeah.
in. And he said that gradually what you do is you close that gap. Your performance begins to match what you had in your head. And I think for me that was the secret, and that's what I did. So I didn't say this book is perfect. I'm absolutely not changing a thing. I knew it wasn't. I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
didn't quite know how to fix it.
Hmm. The other thing that I want to highlight that you did that I think is so smart is you took those other point of view characters and put them in a separate file. Off they went. It's a variation on the writing advice of kill your little darlings,
Yeah.
because you specifically said you loved them, you valued them, but they had to go away. And I think that's a real tribute to you as showing this initiative and letting yourself close that gap. You know, really what it all comes down to is writing a good book. Uh, in other words, there are excellent books written first person, excellent books written third person,
Yes.
excellent books written from one point of view, excellent books written from multiple points of view. That's not the issue. There's no, I'm convinced there's no one way to write a good book.
I agree.
But the question is, what makes a book good?
Yeah.
And that's the question to you. What makes a book good?
I can only
That's a
speak
mean
personally
question.
about this. Yeah, what makes well, okay. First of all, I love I love words. I love language. I love putting ideas and emotions in beautiful words and getting a lot out of a few words. I love that. That's always been my ambition. I love to work with the English language. That's why I love revision so much, Jane. Um, it's painful for me to write a first draft because my words aren't beautiful. And
Do you
what,
prefer revision to first drafts?
oh
Do you
yes.
prefer?
Oh yes, yes, yes,
Me
yes.
too.
I mean, just give me anything that anybody has written, including myself, however bad it is, I have fun then. Getting those first words on the page is just like getting blood out of a stone. I remember I think I read about Lytton Strachey one time. He was writing a biography of Queen Victoria, and he talked about having Queen Victoria down on the ground with his hands around her neck, trying to get her life out of her. And I feel like that sometimes. So I what makes a good book for me is good writing, beautiful writing,
Prose.
evocative writing. Yes. And there is a rhythm to the English language. It's somebody once said it was iambic pentameter was the rhythm of the English language. I don't know if that's true, but there is a rhythm and words that a person can read without having to stop and go back and go, wait a second, I've got to reread that. So writing so that the words flow so the reader can keep reading and just keep reading without having to go over bumpy road. I I don't know how else to say it, but I love that. I also
That's,
love
I want to interrupt for one
characters.
second before you get to your
Yes.
next point. Your, your metaphor about the blood from a stone and hands around neck to get the story out. It reminds me of Jonathan Santlifer, who said writing a novel to him is like he's fallen into a cave and has to claw his way out to the light. I
Oh,
think that's another
love
good
that.
metaphor,
Yeah,
right?
that's a wonderful metaphor. But once I get something down, then I can work with it. And there's it. I mean, to me, it's like candy. I mean, it's like dessert. I just love the revision process. And I know
So
some people think the opposite.
you were going to make a point about what else makes a good book.
Yeah, I think characters that you care about, um, characters that you can really invest in. Um, you actually
As in root
care.
for? Do you mean root for?
Yeah, you're on their side. There has to be at least one person, to me, one character that I can get on their side. I can identify with them. I want them to be successful. I want them to win. I love getting to know them. So that's important to me. So cardboard characters who just fill roles in a plot isn't that interesting to me. Um, I also like kind of a complicated plot, and people have either complimented me or criticized me for having complicated plots. And I don't know, I don't seem to be able not to do that, but I enjoy reading complicated plots with a lot of threads. But those threads then have to come together at the end. So I don't want any loose threads hanging out there. So I love plots where you got all kinds of questions in your mind, story questions, and one by one kind of they get answered and then things kind of get resolved. I also love setting. I love feeling immersed in a setting, just like you are entering into that world. And so you almost hate to put the book down because you don't want to leave that world. And then when you have time to read, you're so happy to get back into that world and kind of live through that world with those characters again. So, gosh, I think so plot, character setting,
And prose.
and prose, yeah, and there are other things too, but I think those are probably the main
Well, how about
ones.
structure?
Structure is something that I had to learn. Now I have a master's degree in English literature, so I've read, I'd read tons of books, and I thought, well, I know what makes a good book. I can write a good book. Well, I didn't know anything about story structure, so I've had to learn that. And to me, that's a challenging thing. Kind of gotten that down. Your book on story structure and subplots helped me a lot. I can't remember the name of it now. What was it?
Mastering suspense, structure, and plot.
Matt, yeah, so that helped me. That roadmap you had, it was kind of a visual. I'm sort of a visual person. I also use a thing called the plot clock, and it's just a visual. And the person, Camp McSweeney, I think, she says, "Oh, just disseminate it. There's no copyright. You can use it. You can share it with other people." But to me, it's a visual of how you go through an entire plot from beginning to end. And those visual clues help me. So there's all kinds of plot stuff that doesn't make any sense to me at all. But
That's
that
great.
does.
If you would send that to me and
Sure.
John, we'll include it in the
Yeah.
hand. So everybody, you'll get the plot wheel. Was that what it was called? What is it called?
The plot clock.
Plot
The plot
clock.
clock.
And
Yeah.
speaking of clock, one of the big issues I have is tracking timing in my books.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
with murder, especially alibis, sometimes you're down to seconds and it has to be consistent, coherent. Nobody can suddenly appear just out of the blue. So, how do you track time in your books?
Um, One way that I do it is I am not this kind of a person, so I'm kind of shocked that I'm even doing this, but I have done from the very first book is that I make a spreadsheet. And I have, because I use a 4-act structure, and I get a little OCD about this stuff. So I have it color coded. In the background, it's pink is act one, blue is or green is act two, purple is act three and pink is act four, or something like that. And then I have
Two pinks.
the
We need a different color.
chapter. Yeah.
You had pink as
Okay.
Act One. Doesn't matter,
Yeah. Well,
but
I've got
four
them.
different
I've got four
colors.
colors. Um, so I have the chapter, the scene. I have the date, the day and the date. Then I have the location. Then I have the people that are there. Then I have a little place where I put just a basic thing about what happened. Then I have how many pages are in that scene, and then how many pages are in the whole chapter. And I populate it as I go. And so I can always go back and find where I had this clue or that clue. But I am going to say I am not a genius at this. And I have a wonderful copy editor at Crooked Lane who points out where I have gone wrong with my timing. And because my plots are complicated, timing often plays a big role. And in the one I just did, which was a collection of lies, it depended on that almost minute by minute. And she pointed out some places, but gave me an opportunity to fix it, and it wasn't hard to fix.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my new book is Beat the Bots, a writer's guide to surviving and thriving in the age of AI. And Connie was an advanced reader and said very nice things. So thank you so much for that. But the reason I mention it is there's a whole section, a whole chapter in there on organizational strategies. And
Yes.
there are software programs that actually will do some of the time tracking.
Yeah.
I do something
Yeah.
similar to you, but instead of a spreadsheet, I just create a chart in Word um, to track very similar things.
Yeah.
Um, but in any event, do something, people, do something. You've got to track time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I have a few specific process questions, if I might. Are you a morning owl or a morning person or a night owl?
I am an afternoon person.
That was not one of my
So
options.
I know, but I used to be a night owl. I'm not anymore. I tend to go to bed early, 9 o'clock, something like that. Maybe
Wow.
9:30 if I'm watching a good show. Um, Mornings, I like to go slow. I like to get up. I like to have breakfast, feed the dog, take the dog for a walk. I like to look at the news. I like to look at my emails. And then probably around 10:30, I start to look at my manuscript. And what I often do, actually, I should say always do, is I start by revising what I wrote the previous day. And what it does is that gets me back into the book
Yeah.
so that then I'm in the book. So then I usually have a little lunch and then I'm really serious. And so I work pretty seriously from say 12:30, 1 o'clock until um, say 5. And and then I take off, spend some time with my husband when he's home from work. And yeah, so afternoon is my optimal time.
Are you a music person or a quiet person?
Oh, very quiet. Yes. Can't have distractions.
Do you work in one place in an office or do you work wherever you are? Do you go to a coffee shop sometimes?
I have an office. I have an office here. We have a cottage in Wisconsin, and I write very well there because it's very quiet. So up there, I have a desk that looks out on the woods and the lake, and I love that because I love looking at my screen, but then I also like looking out and just enjoying the beauty of nature. Here at home in Ohio, unfortunately, my desk faces the wall, but that's the way it is. Yeah, I always work at my computer at my desk.
And um, you mentioned your plots are complicated. Do you plot in advance or plot as you go?
I am what's called, or some people call it tentpole plant plotter. And I don't know if you know what that means, but I have major plot points, very major. And in an entire book, there might possibly be six. And so I kind of know what those things are. Sometimes I change as I write, things change sometimes, but I start out with that, and I know approximately that they're gonna fall on this plot clock that I use. And but I don't know how I'm gonna get from point A to point B or from the first to the second tent pole. And so that's kind of pantsing. So I'm a like a plantser, or
How
I
do
don't
you
know what the technical term is.
how do you come up with the idea in the first place? When I was writing my Josie books, I always started with the
Yeah.
antique. The first thing I
Yeah.
was the pivotal antique. How about you?
I am similar to that. I start with some idea about something that has to do with the antiques trade or history. I incorporate a lot of history into my books because I love history. And the antiques trade is the perfect profession for my sleuth because the antiques trade involves history. And that's something that was kind of bred into me. I've told this story a lot, but my mother was a meticulous researcher, and she would look into the history of the objects that they sold in their shop, and she would write extensive papers on that. And she said, which actually a line that made it into one of my books with, I think, Kate's mom was, that way people aren't just buying an object, they're buying a piece of history.
Mm.
So I love to incorporate the history, but what I do is when something grabs my imagination and I'm just so fascinated by it, I want to use it in the book. So for a collection of lies, it was the Romany culture in Devon. That book is set in Devon. And I was so fascinated by that. And I did a lot of research, and I was very, very fortunate to actually meet one of the leading Romani leaders in England. His name is Dr. Thomas Acton. He is a university professor, retired now, but lovely man who read my manuscript and gave me lots of advice. My husband and I were actually able to meet him and his wife this past October when we were in England. It's so much fun. But um, yeah, so just something that captures my imagination.
If why are your books set in England?
Because I love England. I'm an Anglophile. I always have been. I had Scottish grandparents. And when I was getting my master's degree, I remember my advisor said, choose something that you really love because you're going to spend a lot of time there. And when you're writing a book, you're going to spend a lot of time in this place with these people. And that's where I would like to spend time. So it's just for me. I mean, I read almost exclusively British crime fiction. I love to watch British crime shows on television, and I love to go to England and to the whole British Isles whenever I can. We usually try to go at least once a year. So it's just what I love.
That's yeah, well, and that's it's a good fit.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for writers who are hoping to get traditionally published?
Mm. First of all, I think you do have to be willing to put in the work. Um, I I think that in order to write well, you have to be well read. That rhythm of language has to become so incorporated in you that you're able to reproduce it. Um, but much of this is actually craft. So to learn your craft, so I would say learn your craft, take classes, have go to webinars, go to conferences, um, improve your craft to the best of your ability. Don't be satisfied with that level, like Ira Glass. Don't be satisfied with that gap. Work toward closing that gap because your taste is always going to be higher than your ability to reproduce it at first. So I think I often read unpublished manuscripts and comment on them through different programs, through Guppies and Sisters in Crime and MWA and so forth. And that's what I always say. The idea may be wonderful, but the execution, this is a profession. This is not a hobby. And you can treat it like a hobby, and that's fine. But if you want to be traditionally published, you have to treat this as a profession. And like any other profession, you have to equip yourself and you have to grow in your skill and your ability.
You know, the way I think of it, I agree with you 100%. The way I think of it is that most of us writers are innate storytellers, but that has nothing to do with craft. You have to
That's right.
learn the structure, the plotting, the characterization, and character building, and so on. So I
But
agree.
you can't have, I mean, all the skill in the world is not going to help unless you have that story.
Yeah,
So that story that captures my imagination, that I then can try to capture the imagination of readers is there. But then how you present that story is where the craft comes in.
it's great. Do you now sell from Synopses?
I'm sorry, would you say that again?
Do you now sell the next book in your series from a synopsis?
No, I don't. I sell it probably because they think that the next book will sell. Because my editor knows me well. She knows my series, knows my characters. Um, I did have to do a short synopsis for this last one only because they wanted to do a cover and a title and a flap copy and so forth. And I'll tell you, they are painful.
They're
They are
terrible.
they are challenging, really, really challenging. I'd almost rather write a whole book than a one-page synopsis. But one thing that writing a synopsis will do for you, I think, if you haven't sold your book, is it will tell you yourself what your book is about. And if you cannot write what that book is about in one page, you probably don't know yet what your book is about.
Yeah.
And so I think if you have real trouble coming up with a log line, a blurb, a one-page synopsis, that tells you you have to think a little bit deeper about what your book is actually about. And that's why it's hard to do that prospectively. Going back after you finished your book and writing a synopsis is one thing, but writing it prospectively is a challenge. And for me, it's always going to change. It's always going to
Mhm,
change in
mhm.
some respect.
You know, you're reminding me of a piece of advice that was given by Janet Reed, who is no longer
Yeah.
with us. She died not that long ago, but a wonderful literary agent. And she said, if you're looking for an agent, send out 10 queries. If you get no responses, there's something wrong with your query.
Mm.
If you get more than 5 responses, you have a good query. And if they'll ask to see sample pages with whatever their policy is. If you submit to those 5 agents and you get no nibbles, there's something wrong with your book. And I just thought that was so sensible, so practical.
Yeah.
One step at a time. Is it the query or is it the book?
Yeah. I learned a lot from her, reading her. What was that blog she
Shark,
had going?
shark
Yeah, Shark
query.
something.
Shark
Shark,
query.
yeah, Query Shark,
Query
I
shark.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I used to follow that religiously, and I learned so much from her.
Yeah. Yeah. John, I think we're ready to open it up to questions.
We have quite a few in the queue here. We'll start with one that could go to either of you, honestly. They ask, in the January-February issue of Writer's Digest, there's an article, Mayfly Marketing by Paul Goat Allen. He maintains that the current generation of readers have short attention spans, and that the result is the average New York Times bestseller decreased by 51 pages between 2011 and 2021. That since page counts are dropping, so are pages within chapters. However, from my advice, I've always heard that a novel should be 80 to 90,000 words. I planned on 350 pages for my novel with roughly 22 chapters. As a first-time novelist looking to get eyes on my work and the attention of an agent, how many words and how many pages should you plan for these days to have a marketable piece of work?
Well, I can certainly answer that, and then Connie, maybe you can jump in. 80 to 90,000 is right. My contracts actually were getting longer. And I think anything over 70,000 has a shot. Anything over 100,000 is too long, with, a few exceptions. Thrillers tend to be longer than traditional mysteries. So part of it depends on the subgenre you're in within the mystery world. Literary fiction can be really quite short, but it could also be quite long. I think 350 typewritten pages sounds right to me. That's assuming you're doing Times Roman 12 points. Get rid of the extra space between the paragraphs. Make sure you're indenting them normally, normal margins. You'll end up with an 80,000 word manuscript at 350 if you have roughly the same amount of dialogue. I'd still aim for 7 to 10 page chapters. And that was because I was writing traditional mysteries that felt right. Thrillers tend to be very short chapters. Look at Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, which is still selling very well. He has chapters that are a paragraph, that are a page. So I really think it depends on the book, the style, the genre, the pace you're trying to achieve. Don't let the market drive you ever, because by the time you figure it out, the market has changed. Connie, anything to add?
I totally agree with that. I think it depends upon genre partly, and I think it also, even subgenre, like you said, I think a cozy mystery is different than a traditional mystery, which is what I write. Mine tend to be in the 90 to 96,000 word category. I have chapters similar to yours, but I often have two scenes in a chapter, perhaps even three. So some of the scenes may be shorter. And a lot of it depends on pacing. And I think that as I'm getting toward the important, really important conclusion of my book, I've noticed that my chapters tend to get a little shorter. There may be more 6 pages, 7 pages. Yeah, but I think I agree with everything you said. And I especially agree with it. Don't try to write to the market. If you have a good book, you will find readers.
Great. John?
Excellent. Someone asked, Connie, you said at some point in your writing career you took your own advice, and that was part of the start of things progressing. Were you teaching writing?
No, I didn't take my own advice. I took the advice of people that I had come to know through conferences, people that I respected, people that were successful in their writing careers and were good enough to read at least a portion of what I had written. And that is quite a gift because writers are very, very busy people. And so to ask someone to read your work is can be quite an imposition. But when someone says, well, send me a chapter or, send me the book, then of course you will do that. And so the advice I had been getting, and I think I said mostly it was, why don't you try first person? Why don't you try single point of view, first person, you know, past tense? And so that's what I took. I didn't have advice for myself because I didn't know enough at that point. I knew what was good. I knew my book wasn't there. I wasn't sure what to do. And so when I finally took the advice that I was given, that was a
Great.
good thing.
John?
Okay. Speaking of writers being very busy, someone wanted to know, how do you go about getting endorsements and reviews for your covers?
Blurbs.
Yeah, blurbs essentially.
Mhm.
Yeah. For my first book, I asked people that I admired, and they were kind enough to say yes. But now my publisher sends out advanced reader copies, and they gather blurbs for me. Um, I think every once in a while I do ask if someone would read my book, and they are very kind to do that and to blurb it. Jane is one.
I very much enjoy your books. They're great. Um, yeah, the first book is the issue, and um, sometimes your agent can help put you in touch with people who are an appropriate fit. But it is one of the reasons you go to conferences and workshops and so on, and that you meet people that you can then ask. It is an incredible favor they are doing you to do this, because it takes an enormous amount of time. You know how long it takes you to read a book, and then to think of how to word what it is you want to say to accentuate the positive. It's it's a process, but it is also something that is good for the people doing it, um, because your name will be on their cover. And that can't be bad for you um, as a writer. The reason I hesitated there is I also want to make the point that you almost always only do it for the first book. Sometimes if something is changed or something, you go ahead and ask someone. But typically what happens is your first book in a series gets reviewed. And then the second book, what's going to be on the cover are excerpts from the reviews. Now that's probably the second part of that question, which is how do you get reviewed? This is something your publisher's publicist does. They send review copies out to all the appropriate organizations, publications. Sometimes they'll do things like Goodreads, giveaways. I've been with St. Martin's, was my publisher for Josie, and they were meticulous I mean, there's never any pay for play. It is strictly on the up and up. May I send you a book? If you like it and want to post something, great. But I do know that there are opportunities to buy reviews as well. And I'll leave it at that. I don't approve.
Okay. I would like to say that since we're coming up on 2 o'clock, we're going to stay a few minutes after to continue answering questions. However, since we are approaching that time and some of you need to leave right away, we wanted to thank you for attending today's discussion and remind you that if you have any questions remaining in the queue that are more general questions and not specifically for Connie, we might use those for one of Jane's Ask Jane YouTube shorts, quick 1 to 3 minute videos that answer a critical question about writing and let you get back to work. You can find those at janecleveland.com/YouTube. We've also will be posting a copy of this or a replay of this discussion on YouTube, probably later next week. So if you have to leave now, that should include the Q&A that you miss. Finally, if you enjoyed today's discussion and would like to join us in the future, we'd love to see you at one of Jane's future events. Currently, we have options on the list through April, with more to come, and you can find the full list at janecleveland.com/events. Is there anything you'd like to add, Jane?
Oh, thank you, John. Yes, I just want to add, I'm delighted to stay for a while after. These questions I think are so interesting. But I do, for those of you that need to leave, I want to wish you great strength and solace from reading and writing. Thank you for spending time with me. See you soon. All right, John.
Okay, Connie, someone wanted to know if you could give the name of the Romani professor who helped you with your book.
His name is Dr. Thomas Acton, Acton, and he has a PhD from, I think, Cambridge in Romani studies, and he has spent his whole career in this field. And one of the things he does is he reviews literature that mentions the Romani culture in England. And One of the things that was so interesting, I don't know if you'll think it is, but I thought it was. And when I started out with this storyline, it took place in the Victorian era. My Romany culture was Victorian Romany culture. And I assumed that the word gypsy was a racial slur and that I wasn't going to use it. And when I talked to him, he explained to me that the Romany culture in England is different. They are called Romanishals, and they are a distinct ethnic group, and they use the word gypsy. And the reason is they say, our forefathers died for that name. We are proud to bear it. And so I of course, had to put that in my acknowledgments and because I wanted people to know that. But I had no idea. And there was a lot that I didn't know. And so he has just been, and in fact, we are still friends. We still email back and forth a lot. And he has a book coming out that is on the Romany culture, and I'm certainly going to read that when it comes out.
Excellent.
Excellent. Someone says both your series incorporate detailed knowledge of antiques and history. What's your research process like when featuring specific antiques or historical elements in your books?
You go first, Connie.
Okay, well, first of all, I had a background, as I know Jane does as well, in the antiques trade. My parents were avid collectors. I always say they opened a shop not because they really wanted to sell antiques, because they just needed to make more room so they could buy more stuff, which is what they did. It was all over our house all the time. Every single vacation we went on was actually a thinly disguised buying trip, and we would pile the car with stuff. So this is just how I grew up, going to auctions, going to antique shows on the weekends. I worked in the shop, but I don't know it all. Far from it. And so I do meticulous research on this, and that is my very favorite thing to do, even more than revision, is research. I can get lost in research and I love it. And the things that I research for my books, the one that I'm working on right now, I am researching things like uh, uh, birthing goat kids, alpacas. I mean, there's just so much, and everything I'm writing, and I go, oh, I don't really know about that. Grief bots. Have you ever heard of grief bots? Look it up. It's a very interesting grief bots. Um, and I think I don't know about that. So then I go and I have to do research, and I have so much fun, and then I have to distill, what is really necessary. And one of the things that I do in revision is I pare down, because I tend to throw everything in there. And then when I'm going through the final revision, I think that isn't the book. That is really, that's just, I was interested. So I pare it all down to just what is essential.
What's so interesting about that is I also like research better than writing. I love the research, but I have a rule that I only research until I get the specific answer to the question I'm posing that made me go and research it, because otherwise it's a rabbit hole and I'll just be gone forever. I also, I make stuff up. I aim for plausible, not accurate. If I find stuff that is accurate and enhances the story, great. If not, I'll make it up as I need. Because this is fiction.
It is fiction. Yes. Yeah, I am giving myself permission to do that more.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes, the stars align. And there was a pot that I found, and it turns out anyway, you see, I could start telling you my research right now because I find it all so fascinating.
Me
John,
too.
get us another question before we go disappear into the research hole.
Okay. Actually, this one's a follow-up to that question. They want to know how do you weave these details into your stories without overwhelming the pace and narrative of the story?
Oh, yeah. That's Well, I'll just tell you what I have learned how to do, and that is oftentimes when you let your characters talk about it rather than just put a little paragraph in, um, which is what you want to do. I just want to. I I'm a teacher. I spent 25 years teaching. I love to teach people stuff. But that's not a good thing to do. And so oftentimes I will say, even like when there's something complicated, I'll have one character go, "Wow, that's complicated. I don't get that." And then the other character can kind of explain it a little bit. But that paring down process, one woman that I knew, she's also gone. Um, and she told me just use brush strokes. Just use brush strokes. And you don't need to give the whole thing. People will be able to fill in with their mind. And so that's what I always try to think of when I'm going through my final revisions is pare it down to just what is actually necessary and needed for the purposes of the story.
Yeah, that's a perfect metric. And John, what is the name of the seminar, the webinar I did? Because I know it's in the replay library on descriptions on the world in a word.
Yes, that would be.
Because whether it's setting, whether it is describing an antique, whether it's describing someone's appearance, it has to be the telling detail, the relevant, the detail that no more need be said, because it either alludes to the bigger thematic importance or it reveals the key facts, or it, with that brush stroke, it lets you see the whole picture.
Have you heard of Neil Gaiman's Funny Hats?
Yes, tell a little bit about it.
That, yeah, his theory is just that you give your characters some so distinctive characteristic or some metaphor or analogy that just lands with the reader and they will remember that. It's like a funny hat. It's not a literal funny hat, but I have found that to be very helpful. That telling detail.
Yeah, and only one per. If you have a character who's bald, he can't also wear a funny hat. If you have a character who walks with a limp, she can't also have a scar, unless, of course, they're from the same accident or whatever. But yeah, don't be heavy-handed, I guess is the lesson.
Okay. We have multiple people asking, what are the guppies?
Oh, the Guppies are an online chapter, Sisters in Crime. They started out to be GUP Guppies, the Great Unpublished, but people loved the community so well that they stayed on after they were published. I am certainly one of those. And we are, I think, about 1,100 strong now. We offer craft classes. We have offer a fantasy agent project where you can have, I think it's 30 pages of your manuscript reviewed as if it were an agent. And these are published people doing it. We have manuscript swaps. We have critique groups we set up. We have a listserv where people can ask questions. We have a monthly craft question. And it is just a wonderful community of writers, about half and half now, or maybe slightly more unpublished. Some are self-published, some are looking to be traditionally published. But I have the privilege of being the current president of Guppies. We are publishing on February 1st our eighth anthology. 23 of our Guppies have stories, and they all have to do with crime on vacation. Crime takes a holiday.
Very nice. It is a chapter of Sisters in Crime.
Yes. An online chapter only. We don't have meetings.
Yeah, good. Nice.
Okay.
Well,
Someone
I think we have
says,
time for one more question.
okay. Someone says 7 books since 2017. That seems like an incredible pace of production. Can you tell us how you manage all those words?
Actually, it's 2019. I had my first 2 books published in 2019, which I would not recommend because they compete with each other. But I was just so happy to have a contract. I didn't know better. So yeah, I've had,
But
well, I
let me
have
just
six.
interrupt. Why didn't they know
Yeah.
better? Why didn't your publisher know better?
I don't have any idea. I didn't know enough to ask, and I've never asked since, and it's water over the bridge, so why worry about it now? But I think that my second book got a little bit short shrift because of that. But I have one, two, three, four, five, six. I'm actually working on my sixth book right now, but I do have a novella that I wrote as well. And I try to have one a year.
Yeah, that's the pretty
And to have
typical
one a year.
escalator. That's the escalator. Once you get on it, they want one a year. Um, and one of the reasons, what I anticipate is that if someone falls in love with your book, they don't want to wait a year for the next one. And so it might be they were so confident in your series, Connie, they wanted them to come out one and then the next. In terms of the second one not doing quite as well as the first, sometimes there is a thing in publishing called the sophomore slump. It's just a thing. And sometimes, you know, the backlist catches up after, you sort of
Yeah.
build critical mass.
I
Sometimes not.
I think it's gotten wonderful reviews, but it just I think was overshadowed because a debut novel always gets more attention.
Yeah.
Brand new author, debut novel, and then the second one doesn't get that attention if it's in the same year. So if you have that, if anybody is out there, that's just one little piece of advice. Try not to do that.
Fair enough. John, is anything else that you think we need to address, or should we?
Someone wanted to know what Connie's revision process looks like.
Hmm, that's good. Good question.
Oh, yeah. I oh, what it looks like. Well, I go through my book so many times I could probably quote it after almost from beginning to end. But my revision process, and this is a piece of advice from Hank Philippi Ryan. And I've mentioned this a lot. I've thanked her for it. She said one time in a class of hers that I was in, she said, take out everything that isn't the book. And that resonated with me.
Hmm.
And that is what I do. I honestly, I smooth out language. I'm always trying to get that rhythm of the language right, but I'm taking out anything that isn't the book. And so I always start long and I condense and I bring down until it's all the book. I know some people do the opposite. They write short and then they have to fill in or embellish, but that's not me.
Yeah, I'm that. I write short and then I have to add in emotion. I am good at plotting. I am less good at characters. It, I think I'm good now, but it takes work.
Yeah,
Whereas
it
plotting is
does.
much more natural activity for me. So I have to go back as part of my revision process and make sure that the character motivations align with what I'm having them do. And that
Good
always adds
advice.
length.
Excellent. And I think that brings us to the end of things. Yeah, is there any closing words that you or
Yes,
Connie would like
Connie,
to
do you
add?
have any last thing you want to say?
Um, Thank you for having me. This has been very fun. I love your books. I have been a big fan of yours, so it's just very fun to get to talk with you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Connie. It's been a great pleasure having you here, and I look forward to working with you going forward. And everybody, thank you again. See you soon. And until we meet again, I hope you find great strength and solace from reading and writing.